Welcome to the NCD Alliance webinar. I will now turn the call over to Katie Kane, Executive Director of the NCD Alliance.
Thank you very much. Good morning, good afternoon, or evening, everybody. This is Katie Kane from the NCD Alliance. Welcome to the webinar. The last webinar we had was quite a while ago, 20th of January, just before the WHO Executive Board, so a great deal has happened since then. So we have a packed agenda for you today. Firstly, we're going to have two presentations from two regional advocates who are really pleased to have join us as guest speakers today. Firstly, we have Maisha Hutton, the Executive Director of the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, to share the findings of a report that they commissioned on national NCD commissions in the Caribbean region. So really looking at multi-stakeholder commissions in the Caribbean. This will be followed by Shoba John, a well-known tobacco advocate and NCD advocate to many of you, who has worked with the WHO Southeast Asia region to develop a multisectoral NCD coordination mechanism guidance document. So both of those presentations will be really focused on regional experiences and recommendations on national NCD commissions. Following those two guest presentations, we'll move on to the advocacy updates. Alena Matzke from the NCD Alliance team will be giving you an update on what came out of the 138th WHO Executive Board, which took place in January, as well as really looking towards the World Health Assembly coming up very soon in May in Geneva. That will be followed by Cristina Parsons Perez from the NCD Alliance to talk you through what happened at the recent WHO NCD Focal Points meeting that took place on the 15th to the 17th of February in Geneva as well. And then finally we'll have Priya Kanayson from the NCD Alliance to give you an overview of some UN New York updates, particularly looking at the Sustainable Development Goal Indicator Framework, the Commission on the Status of Women, which is happening right now, as well as the UN High-Level Panel on Access to Medicines, whose work is currently underway. So with no further ado, let me pass over to Maisha Hutton, the Executive Director of the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, to present on national NCD commissions in the Caribbean. Maisha.
Thank you, Katie. So we're very pleased to be given the opportunity to present on national NCD commissions in the CARICOM and the experiences that we have found through the report that we commissioned. So just a quick bit about the HCC, or the Healthy Caribbean Coalition. We're an alliance of civil society organizations throughout the Caribbean, and we were born out of the 2007 Port of Spain meeting on NCDs, at which time heads of government really endorsed the need for a multi-stakeholder whole-of-society response to NCDs and identified civil society as playing a central role. So at that very same meeting, the heads of government also were very specific about the endorsement of the need for a platform for a national multisectoral response to NCDs, and they strongly encouraged the establishment of these NCD commissions, or analogous bodies, to plan and coordinate responses to NCDs at a national level. Fast forward on, global support for multisectoral mechanisms has been wide, and we started with the 2011 Declaration on NCDs, in which there was a call for a multisectoral approach. WHO discussion papers in 2012 again underscored the need for effective approaches for strengthening multisectoral action. And then very specifically in the 2014 outcome document, there was a specific call for national multisectoral mechanisms such as high-level commissions. And we've also had global NCD leadership echoing this call. In 2014, with support of the NCD Alliance and Medtronic Philanthropy, the HCC worked with the University of the West Indies to develop a regional status report on the response to NCDs in the Caribbean. And that was the first part of the assessment of how the NCD commissions operate. This formed an element of that report. Based on that report, we went on in 2015, again with funding from the NCD Alliance and in partnership with the university, to undertake a very detailed assessment on NCD commissions, how they functioned. We provide profiles of each of the commissions in the Caribbean, what have been the challenges and the successes and the lessons learned, and how we could make really strong recommendations for strengthening these commissions moving forward. So what are the national NCD commissions? They're national platforms to really support a whole of society and whole of government response to NCDs. And the schematic to the right, Compliments of Sir George, illustrates what we mean by whole of government and whole of society. Whole of government really bringing together the non-health, health-influencing sectors such as trade, education, finance, etc., and then whole of society bringing together those three critical elements, government, private sector, and civil society. In the Caribbean, these commissions have really been instruments of government sitting largely within ministries of health and with a role to advise the Minister of Health. They have been either standalone NCD commissions or in some instances they've been broader NCD committees sitting within overarching health and wellness commissions. And there are a variety of reasons for this, some of them resource limitations and size of the islands. So national NCD commissions in the Caribbean currently, the photo to the left is the existing Barbados National NCD Commission. The term is 2016 through to 2018. And you'll see in the photo we have the Minister of Health, the Permanent Secretary, the CMOs to support at the highest levels, and then key stakeholders at the highest levels from other ministries that are non-health, as well as the private sector and civil society. 12 of the countries in the Caribbean have formed NCD commissions or equivalent bodies, and 9 are currently active. The mandate of the commissions has largely been advisory and in some instances implementation where resources are available. They advise to the Minister of Health, and we have one commission in Guyana which was recently formed which sits in the Office of the Prime Minister and advises to the PM. The advisory roles around policies and legislations and programs in support of implementation of the National Strategic Plan. These commissions, as I mentioned earlier, are really meant to foster a whole of government and whole of society response to the epidemic, so they really function to broker effective involvement and collaboration across these sectors. In some instances, they play a role in resource mobilization, recommendation of research priorities, and M&E and surveillance. The composition of the national NCD commissions is usually there's a chairperson, there are ex officio members consisting of chief medical officers, NCD focal points, chief nursing officers, representatives of those key non-health ministries, civil society representatives, private sector, and in some situations there are NCD commissions which have subcommittees which respond to priority needs in the country. And examples of those are healthy school committees, healthy workplaces, etc. The report highlighted some significant challenges with these vehicles of multisectorality, and in no particular order I'm going to list some of those. Inadequate resources, insufficient technical assistance to really allow for implementation of the strategic plans and the mandates of the commissions, the lack of clear direction, weak methods of appointment, and that links to challenges around legal standing or minimal autonomy to implement the recommendations which are made by the commissions. Lack of strong, committed leadership to really guide the commission and also to establish relationships with the highest levels. Limited realization of a whole of government and whole of society approach, and by that we mean, in terms of representation. Do we have representation from non-health ministries at the highest levels? Do we have representation broadly from private sector and civil society? And then do those commissioners have the capacity to really effectively play a role and to influence NCD programming within their own spheres? And then when we talk about private sector representation, are there mechanisms to address conflict of interest? And then limited advisory roles. So do these commissions have the teeth to really implement the recommendations that they make? Or do they have access to the Ministers of Health and in some instances the Prime Minister? There are many successes as well, and this slide gives a snapshot of some of those successes. And a lot of them are around supporting national initiatives, such as implementation of SCTC-related legislation, supporting implementation around alcohol policy, supporting national NCD risk factor surveys and population salt reduction campaigns, supporting implementation of the Caribbean Wellness Day, and then generally contributing to greater NCD awareness in the community and an appreciation of the need for a multisectoral response. One of the novel successes we've had in some of the islands is around engaging the private sector. One of the NCD commissions was able to influence a bread company to move ahead with reduction of salt content in their breads. And then another one of the commissions has recently developed an interministerial task force to really bring true meaning to the idea of a whole of government response to NCDs, engaging ministers outside of health. So based on these challenges and the successes, what are the key lessons learned and recommendations emerging from the report? First of all, strong leadership was strongly correlated with successful national NCD commissions. Where there was strong leadership, the commissions tended to be much more successful, and they're currently in operation. Dedicated technical support, clearly defined terms of references and strategic plans to inform the roles and responsibilities of commissioners, including conflicts of interest for private sector members. The need for enshrining NCD commissions in legislation to ensure that they have the ability to influence and effectively collaborate with senior decision makers across government, civil society, and the private sector. Commissions need secretariats with appropriate funding commensurate with their mandates. There is a need to connect commissions to facilitate dialogue and sharing. And then finally, one of the recommendations was for the establishment or development of guidance to support the operationalization of NCD commissions. So today, what is the HCC working on under this umbrella? We're working with the Commonwealth Secretariat to move Part 1 of that report to the findings to Part 2, in which we really provide a tool to support commissions in the region, those commissions which are just in the infancy stages, so assisting with establishment, and then those commissions which need strengthening. And so this tool is really meant to be a step-by-step guide or an implementation framework, providing practical resources such as sample PORs, sample meeting minutes, strategic plans, action plans, case studies, and a directory of existing commissions and commissioners. The tool is currently in a kind of a pilot process or pilot phase. We're working with 3 countries, and the photos here are 2 of those countries. The first one is Grenada, and that's their existing commission. And the second photo below is St. Vincent and the Grenadines, and that's a task force that they established to work on moving forward the process of establishing their wellness commission. And the last bullet there really speaks to HCC's role as a civil society alliance. And one of the key areas that we're focusing on within the context of these commissions is strengthening the role of civil society to really contribute in a meaningful way. And we're really pushing for the establishment of national NCD alliances to represent civil society as a coherent, unified voice to push for priority areas around NCD programming and policy. To date, Trinidad and Tobago has established an alliance, and we're working with some of the other countries to move this process forward. So in closing, we'd just like to thank the NCD Alliance again for supporting and really helping us to kickstart this work. This report can be found on our website at the link above. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Maisha, for that excellent presentation, and really recommend everybody on the line to read that report if you haven't, because it's a very interesting report. Obviously, it's particularly timely considering that all governments have now committed to developing and establishing national NCD plans and national NCD commissions. So there's a mandate for this, and so this report really kind of highlights what has worked, what hasn't worked, what have been the challenges in the Caribbean context. Maisha, before we move on, can I just ask a couple of questions? And just a reminder to everybody else, you can type in your questions into the chat facility on the webinar facility. Maisha, I just had a couple of questions, unless anyone else has some questions as well. Are there other examples in the Caribbean of these national NCD commissions being built or integrated into existing national AIDS commissions? Because obviously there have been commissions on AIDS for a long time in the Caribbean. Are there examples of that you found?
There are examples of commissions that are wellness commissions in which they have an HIV component because of the size of the island. Resources are limited. The individuals find it challenging to sit on various committees. But we are currently exploring, as part of this phase 2, how we can really draw on the experience of the HIV/AIDS commissions and leverage their experiences to strengthen the national NCD commissions.
Great. And just one other question. Considering that obviously national NCD commissions are very much embedded in the UN High-Level Review on NCD's outcome document from 2014, what sort of a role is PAHO playing at the regional level? Are they providing kind of technical support to countries in developing national NCD commissions as well?
That's a great question, Katie. And PAHO we've been working very closely with PAHO. They actually play a technical lead in this area, and they've been very committed to assisting countries with developing these commissions, and they work closely with them. So this work that we're doing with the Commonwealth Secretariat is very much working with PAHO as well. So we work in collaboration with them around providing assistance with the countries to strengthen their commissions.
Great. Thanks very much, Maisha. Now let's move on to from the Caribbean over to Southeast Asia. Shoba, would you like to present on the guidance document you've been producing with WHO SEARO on multisectoral national NCD commissions?
Sure, and thank you, Katie, and hello, everyone. I hope you can hear me well. If you can't, please let Katie know. I'd like to take on from where Maisha left, and it was very refreshing to hear very practical ground experience of the Caribbean in setting up national NCD commissions. From there, we would go on to look at some of the resources that are emerging in helping member states and other stakeholders in establishing national multisectoral coordination mechanisms for NCDs. One such guidance document has been developed by WHO Southeast Asia Regional Office, drawing on inputs from various stakeholders. And the mandate for this primarily stems from, as we know, the UN Political Declaration on NCDs, which calls for multisectoral action. And further, the WHO Global Action Plan on NCDs gave it a structural framework by calling on its member states to set up high-level commissions, agencies, or task forces to coordinate action around NCDs. And building on these mandates, the WHO Southeast Asia region developed this particular guidance document that we will look at in a bit of detail in the next couple of minutes. It's come to be referred to as the 5x5 guidance document, primarily referring to the 5 key elements it suggests for establishing coordination mechanisms on NCDs, plus the 5 strategies it suggests to bring various sectors on board. And as I mentioned before, this is being developed with input from member states and experts from intergovernmental organizations and international experts who have experience establishing and monitoring similar mechanisms for other issues. We'll begin by looking at the 5 elements of the coordination mechanisms that this document suggests. And beginning with the first of the elements, which is it suggests high-level political leadership to lead the multisectoral coordination mechanisms. It's important, the word here, the operative word here is political leadership, because countries often set up coordination mechanisms that are managed by government officials, which in itself is great because they have a key role in ensuring implementation of NCD policies and programs. However, political leadership is central to ensuring policy coherence and accountability across diverse sectors, which often have conflicting priorities when it comes to NCDs. So very high-level political leadership, preferably at the level of head of government, is what is suggested. And this is based on experience from the HIV/AIDS movement. In the slide here, you can see a table where the Commission on AIDS in Asia examined some of the coordination mechanisms at the national level for HIV/AIDS from the region. And if you look at the right-hand side column, you'll see that commissions that have been headed by heads of governments indicate high-level political commitment, allocation of resources, coordination between sectors, and even prioritization of most at-risk groups to be higher than when led by the Ministry of Health or any other relevant ministry. So this essentially is the basis as a good practice that we're trying to see if that would work similarly for NCDs, and therefore it's recommended for NCDs as well. And this is the supra-ministerial authority to which all other sectors would be required to report as a principle of accountability. So that's the first of the elements that's critical. In the earlier discussion, there was reference to engaging existing mechanisms, which also we see in many countries in the Southeast Asia region. While that is sometimes helpful in the country context, it's important that when NCDs are integrated into such commissions, special care is taken to ensure that there are NCD-specific meetings and agendas as part of such broader commissions. That's a specific guidance this particular document recommends in the context of broader coordination mechanisms into which NCDs are retrofitted. Another key element for the mechanism is having a clear scope and mandate for the coordination mechanism. Often the question is asked, at what level should the mechanism be established? Should it be at national level or at subnational level? Well, that depends largely based on a lot of factors such as, the population size, geographical spread of the country, the political system, and even the health systems and how it's organized. So there's no one size fits all. And for example, smaller countries might just decide to have one national mechanism, or I'm aware of island nations where even a couple of countries have joint coordination mechanisms. So that's a call that is to be taken locally. But it's very important that the national mechanism has its mandate set out very clearly to include providing vision and targets and oversight, as well as resources for the NCD program to benefit the whole country, as well as it provides the policy framework and accountability framework. Whereas when it comes to subnational level mechanisms, the focus needs to be largely to address local challenges, also tap into local resources, and focus on effective implementation and timely reporting back to the national mechanism. Another question which emerges in this space is whether one should start small in terms of the number of ministries that are engaged, or whether we should have an all-encompassing coordination mechanism. Again, two different approaches seem to be at play among the member states. One is starting small with friendly ministries and then building on from there and expanding the scope to include other ministries. One approach that's being seen is involving ministries that can lift the majority of the weight on NCDs. Not always friendly, but they're very critical to moving things for NCDs within the country. So again, that depends on the call on that. It depends on whether the priority of NCDs, how rapid is the epidemic growing in a given country, and how soon the action needs to roll out, or if that country has more time to catch up with the epidemic. Another key element is a very strong secretariat and focal points in the relevant sectors who would be part of the coordination mechanism. One good practice that is emerging from this particular research is drawing core expertise for the secretariat from various sectors rather than just limiting it to a particular sector like the health sector. This seems to be bringing in a greater sense of investment and stake among other sectors, particularly the non-health sectors, and facilitating better communication and coordination. The question that often is asked about what's the best ministry to house the coordination mechanism secretariat. The national board seems to be the ministries of health in many countries. However, if in a country context, if there is another ministry that's providing much more political leadership and stability to the mechanism, then that could also be considered. Equally important are focal points from the other ministries who are part of the mechanism, and they play the connecting role, bringing the issues of that sector to the coordination mechanism, as well as taking the messages back from the coordination mechanism to inform their own sectors. Again, the guidance document provides very detailed terms of reference for both the secretariat as well as the focal points, which I'd encourage you to look up. By the way, a link to the guidance document has been sent on the chat box to this webinar, so please feel free to access it there. Fourth element of the coordination mechanism is a costed joint action plan. I think the title itself sort of communicates the three components that are important here. One is a joint action plan that is developed not just by the Ministry of Health, but involving other ministries. And this would often imply that there can be differences in views or difficulty to reach agreement, which is where the high political leadership that we mentioned earlier can step in and facilitate consensus making towards the national priorities and targets the country has already agreed internationally. So joint agreement consensus action plan is key, and the next step is to make sure that it's costed, that all its components are costed, and last but not the least, to make sure that resources are located. Here, the document in particular calls on Ministry of Health to assist other ministries in finding resources rather than leave it to them to sort of figure it out by themselves. The last element is to make sure that there are accountability indicators built into the coordination mechanism, and this needs to be at both the national and subnational level mechanisms. I've provided some examples of process indicators and outcome indicators, and there's a more comprehensive list that you can find in the guidance document itself. But important to have periodic monitoring of these indicators to make sure that the mechanism is actually working and it's an effective model that is good for the country context. Let's move on next to look at some of the strategies that we can engage, particularly as civil society, to make sure that the relevant sectors are on board the national and subnational multi-sectoral coordination mechanisms that are being proposed for the member states. First strategy is to look at setting the political agenda, and whether it is the Ministry of Health or other ministries or the high-level leadership that we are encouraging for these mechanisms, the first thing they all look for are two things. One is the political preparedness among the public. How receptive and how aware are the public about the harms of NCD? How receptive would they be to interventions on the NCD front? The other aspect that all these key players in the mechanism would look for is political support among the political classes. So this would include parliamentarians, different political parties, and even to a certain extent the government officials and their willingness and preparedness to act on NCDs. So how do we build this kind of both public support and political support? The usual advocacy strategies that we all use day in and day out. I've just highlighted two of them in the red box here. One comes from the HIV/AIDS movement, which has effectively engaged affected communities to front their campaigns to call for multi-sectoral action across ministries, and this seems to have worked very well, and it's recorded in several of the reports from the HIV/AIDS community. The other is the presence of influential people as champions. Several examples of this come from within the SEARO region, where in Thailand, for example, medical professionals have led the campaigns for multi-sectoral action. Or in the case of Sri Lanka, we have the former health minister, who is now the president of the country, leading action, and therefore there's tremendous political support in that country for NCD action now. Second strategy is to make the business case for other sectors. This essentially means three things. One is to showcase that if nothing is done on NCDs, what would be its impact on productivity, on the investments that the government is making in other sectors, as also on the economy as a whole. So showing the cost of inaction. And the other part of the economic evidence piece is showcasing how much would it take for the NCD interventions to be rolled out. WHO has done some good modeling around best buys on this, which countries can take and run with. And the third aspect of the generating the business case is to showcase the return on investment, particularly in the ministries of finance and donor agencies would be interested to see for every dollar that is invested in NCD prevention and control, what would be the return on investment. And this is work for other issues like tuberculosis, in getting the agenda prioritized, or within the governance. Third strategy is to showcase the core benefits of NCDs for other sectors. Just a quick example, if we take the example of Ministry of Rural Development, whose goal generally is to improve the lives of rural communities, and they normally run several agriculture support programs. Is there a way that we can showcase that producing more fruits and vegetables could be useful in improving the lives of rural communities, and therefore tie in directly with the mandate of the Ministry of Rural Development? Another important aspect to keep at the back of our minds while involving other sectors is to identify tasks for them that align directly with the sector's strengths. One example that jumps to my mind is from the Indian HIV/AIDS initiative, which effectively engaged Indian Railways, and they managed to get a full train that runs the length and breadth of the country, both creating awareness and providing diagnostic and counseling services. So that plays to the strength of railways. They had extra trains which they could apply towards that purpose, and the Indian Railways bears the cost of this HIV/AIDS intervention for the whole country. The fourth element, fourth strategy is to make sure that there are process indicators that fit with the mandate of the sectors outside health. Would like to take a moment to explain this. So we spoke about some process indicators earlier to make sure that there is accountability within the mechanism. This is slightly different in the sense that if we look at the Global Action Plan and its targets, they're largely public health in nature. To take an example, if we take the hypertension target, it talks about a 25% relative reduction in the prevalence of raised blood pressure. If we take it to the Ministry of Urban Development, this would sound Greek and Latin to them, or it at least doesn't speak to their priority. Whereas this particular Ministry of Urban Development has the mandate to create urban infrastructure, which includes creating bicycle lanes, footpaths, open spaces for public to have physical activity. Now, if we can break down the public health target on hypertension into process indicators for this sector in their language and make it in terms of number of kilometers of footpaths or cycle lanes laid, then that would bring it closer to their own mandate, and they would be able to find resources and the political will to contribute to laying the infrastructure for improving physical activity and therefore contribute to NCD prevention. Last of the elements is periodic reporting. Now, in the context of NCDs, one can think of three layers of reporting. One is the ministries within the coordination mechanism reporting to the supraministerial authority, let's say the head of a government, and then the head of government reporting to the public for the sake of transparency and accountability on the commitments it has made, both to its people and internationally, and then the country as a whole reporting to intergovernmental mechanisms. The opportunity to use it as an advocacy strategy is primarily for civil society to either encourage these three layers to have periodic reporting, or as also to use the reports that they bring out and showcase some of the successes as well as the gaps, and then advocate for measures to bridge the gap. So these are some of the quick strategies. There's also a third part of the guidance document which talks about the role that intergovernmental organizations, civil society, and also engaging private sector, how can that be done? There's a third section that deals with that. In the interest of time, I wouldn't go into that. But thank you for listening to me, and it will be good to have your feedback or questions, comments after this.
Thank you very much, Shoba, for that really comprehensive presentation. We haven't got any questions at the moment, but while we wait, I've got one for you, if you don't mind. Obviously, this guidance document provides really useful kind of practical advice on how to go about establishing national NCD commissions. What's the current status of commissions in the SEARO region? For example, how many countries have them, and is there a difference in how countries are developing them, whether it's a small country or a large country? Are you seeing any kind of differences in that sense?
Good question. So SEARO has a good experience with establishing intersectoral mechanisms for tobacco control. And I think by now most of the countries in the region have such mechanisms for tobacco control. But on NCDs, the scenario looks a little more patchy. So there have been countries like Thailand that has made some initial steps or experimented setting up such mechanisms and are right now actually evaluating and modifying them. So that's a good sign. There's Sri Lanka that's progressing fast in terms of setting up such mechanisms. It looks like the larger countries are taking a little more time, at least within this region, in establishing the mechanism. It could also be because of the complexities of engaging some of the diverse ministries and getting them on board the agenda, or generally large countries tend to have more issues to deal with in terms of political priorities, and we as a civil society are yet to make enough of a pressure to prioritize NCDs on the agenda. But by and large, SEARO is yet to catch up, in relation to, say, Caribbean or some of the other regions.
Great, thanks, Shoba. We've got another question come in from David Patterson at IDLO, and this is both to Shoba and Maisha, if you're still on as well. What has been the experience in Southeast Asia and the Caribbean with private sector on NCD commissions? Have they been actively involved? If they have, how has that worked out?
I could start. So in SEARO, so as I said, most of the current coordination mechanisms that are related to NCDs are limited to tobacco control. And by and large, the preference has been to keep the tobacco industry out. That's in line with the FCTC obligations and other things. When it comes to NCD commissions, the few that I mentioned, like Thailand, does not involve private sector directly on the commission, but they do have larger assemblies where it's more like a public hearing where the industry can give input along with civil society and others, but not on the national coordination mechanisms per se as of now.
And Maisha, if you're still online, how about the Caribbean experience? I don't think Maisha's on the line anymore. One other question to you, Shoba, again from David. You talked a lot, obviously, about the importance of monitoring and also of reporting. Has there been any experience or is there any interest in civil society shadow reporting?
Not yet. As I said, the SEARO and NCD coordination mechanisms are emerging. I know that from the tobacco experience, the Framework Convention has had some shadow reports a couple of years back, and that was well received. So I guess as and when the NCD coordination mechanisms emerge, by and large, countries in the region work closely with civil society, so I would think that they would involve civil society in some ways, as also entertain shadow reports from the civil society side to inform the coordination mechanisms and their work. But right now, I don't think any of the countries have that mechanism in place, except for tobacco.
Okay, great, thank you. We also just had a message back from Maisha regarding David's question around the private sector. She said that it seems to vary across the Caribbean. So the private sector has been represented on national NCD commissions to varying degrees. In the larger islands, Barbados, Jamaica, and Trinidad and Tobago, there have been private sector companies represented. And the types of companies represented have been from insurance, tourism, food and beverage, including bread companies. So it sounds like it does vary depending on which Caribbean island you're talking about. Okay, fantastic. I'm conscious of time, so we're going to have to move on. But thanks again, Shoba, and to you, Maisha, for those excellent presentations on multisectoral commissions. And for those that haven't read those two documents, really recommend you check them out after the call. Just a reminder that we will be sending around the PowerPoint slides after the call as well, and you'll be able to access the webinar audio as well afterwards. Okay, so moving on to the global, from regional, we'll now move to global advocacy. And let me pass over to Alena Matzke to talk you through the outcomes from the WHO Executive Board and the preparations for the World Health Assembly in May. Alena.
Hi everyone. I'm going to keep this very short, so I'm diving right in. I started my presentation just with an overview of all of the different documents that you wish to access after the webinar. So just as a reminder, there's a link for all of the EB documents, all of the reports, the resolutions, etc. on this slide. There's also two links to updates that we provided on the discussions at the Executive Board, as well as all of our statements, which were many this year. And then looking towards the World Health Assembly in May, there's a link here already where you will be, where all of the WHA documents will be uploaded in the coming weeks. There's a few reports on there already, but just a very small number, nothing on NCDs yet. And there's also a provisional agenda that has been recently published. However, there's no daily schedule yet, so we don't know exactly when which agenda item will be discussed. Next slide, please. So zipping through the EB decision, I'm going to kick us off with the agenda item on the prevention and control of NCDs. As a reminder, the Executive Board report provided a comprehensive overview on progress achieved in implementing the Global Action Plan and also against the 9 global NCD targets, as well as other follow-up to the 2014 UN NCD review in the lead-up to the 2018 NCD, the UN NCD review. Member states noted the overall lack of progress against the 9 global targets and highlighted the need to fast-track national action in the lead-up to 2018. The board endorsed 2 processes, one to update the current Appendix 3 of the Global NCD Action Plan for submission to the World Health Assembly through the Executive Board next year in 2017. We understand that there will be most likely a first draft to open for public consultation in June, and we'll provide you with more information as it becomes available. And the second process is to develop an approach to register and publish contributions of non-state actors in the NCD response. I believe that this process won't really start until we have seen the adoption of the framework for engagement with non-state actors. So far, no more detailed updates available, but we'll let you know as soon as we hear more. And finally, the board adopted a resolution. There was an amendment that was requested by Canada in light of the patchy data for NCDs that the EB report revealed. And so the amendment was to highlight the central role of strong surveillance system in addition to calling for implementation of the 4 time-bound commitments included in the 2014 UN NCD review outcome document. Next slide, please. Moving on to the item on maternal, infant, and young child nutrition, the Executive Board had been presented with a resolution to endorse a new WHO guidance which concerns commercial complementary food for infants under 6 months of age. The inappropriate promotion of these products is often misleading about their nutrition and health-related qualities, and their consumption has also been associated with earlier cessation of exclusive breastfeeding. The Executive Board decided that further discussions on the resolutions were needed ahead of the WHA. So the guidance has not been endorsed yet. There was also a specific request to review the recommendation 6 of the guidance, and if you're interested, at the bottom of the link you can find the report including the guidance. Finally, the The board also requested for the final report of the Commission on Ending Childhood Obesity to be included in the report to the 69th World Health Assembly, as well as information on how the 2025 WHA nutrition targets will be aligned with the targets in the 2030 agenda. A few more remarks on the Commission on Ending Childhood Obesity in a minute. Next slide, please. Of course, the framework for engagement with non-state actors was a hot topic at this year's executive board. There was a lot of discussions around a so-called implications paper to assess the practical and resource implications of the framework on WHO at global and regional level. And it was decided that such a paper will be presented to member states ahead of their next and hopefully final session on the 25th to the 27th of April to ensure the adoption of a consensus text at the 69th World Health Assembly. Next slide, please. Of course, after the adoption of the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development last fall, there was a report that went to the board on health in the 2030 Agenda to ensure and calling on WHO to ensure a fully integrated and multisectoral approach to implement the health goal in the SDGs. NCDs were highlighted at the board as a concern for all countries, and there were 2 resolutions that were introduced on this agenda item. The board endorsed one of these resolutions, which is specifically on universal health coverage, and requested further discussions ahead of the World Health Assembly on a second resolution, which specifically addresses strengthening the role of WHO in the implementation of the 2030 Agenda. Next slide, please. All right. Also, 2 more items that were discussed were the global strategy for women's, children's, and adolescents' health. The EB members took note of a report on the global strategy and suggested that a WHA resolution be developed recognizing the important role of WHO in the implementation of the strategy. The board also requested a technical brief on the implementation of the global strategy, and as far as I know, there's also several side events planned for at the WHO on the strategy. Another strategy and plan of action that was discussed was on aging and health. There were calls for greater emphasis on aspects of gender, equity, and human rights, and together with mental health issues, and there will be a resolution drafted on this agenda item for adoption at the World Health Assembly. Next slide, please. And finally, 2 more items. One being the global response to adverse health effects of air pollution. There was wide support at the Executive Board for a roadmap that has been developed in the recognition of air pollution as an urgent public health priority. The impact of air pollution on NCDs and co-benefit solutions to address NCD risk factors was highlighted, and an updated roadmap together with an indicator framework and specific costing details will be presented to the WHA. Another interesting agenda item from an NCD's perspective was migrant health. The discussions at the board highlighted the centrality of the human right to health for this agenda item. Member states emphasized that the response was not only one of emergency, but must really be informed by a health system strengthening approach and be viewed as a longer-term response. The board agreed on the need for a global framework for action, which pays specific attention to NCDs and mental health. Next slide. At the beginning of the Executive Board week, the Commission on Ending Childhood Obesity presented its final report and recommendations to the WHO Director General. And this report, as you would all agree, is a really important milestone for the prevention of NCDs. The report contains 36 specific recommendations across 6 areas, these areas being to promote intake of healthy foods, promote physical activity, preconception and pregnancy care, early childhood diet and physical activity, promotion of physical activity, health, nutrition for school-age children, and weight management. And the specific recommendations include implementing an effective tax on sugar-sweetened beverages, restricting the marketing of unhealthy foods and sugar-sweetened beverages, developing nutrient profiles to identify unhealthy foods and beverages, implementing a standardized global nutrient labeling system, setting standards for healthy foods, and improving opportunities for physical activity in schools, health and nutrition literacy in the core curriculum of schools, and also actions to optimize maternal and infant health by protecting, promoting, and supporting breastfeeding. An implementation plan and accountability framework will be elaborated over the next year, and I have included here at the bottom of the slide the link to the final report and also the NCD Alliance and World Cancer Research Fund international response to the final report. Next slide, please. Just to end my presentation, a very short preview of WHA side events. Please note there in many of these cases, the exact details of these events are still to be confirmed. So on our side, we'll have our main NCD Alliance event on the Monday evening, the 23rd of May, and then we'll also host a roundtable on healthy workplaces on the Wednesday of the week. In terms of what our partners and the NCD Alliance federations are planning, the World Heart Federation has 2 events, one on Tuesday the 24th of May and also on Thursday the 26th of May, a roundtable on rheumatic heart disease. NCD Child is hosting a breakfast event on Tuesday the 24th of May, and then on Thursday, HelpAge and the International Federation of the Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies are planning an event around the WHO report on aging. We also understand that the Global Alcohol Policy Alliance is planning a side event, but the date is still to be confirmed. Next slide, please. In terms of the official WHA side events, which will take place in the UN Palais des Nations, we understand there have been 70 side event applications received by WHO, and there's really only 24 slots available, and we're currently waiting to hear which side events have been accepted. We are involved in the organization of an event on childhood undernutrition and childhood overweight and obesity. This event has been put forward by Finland with the support of 12 country co-sponsors, the UN Standing Committee on Nutrition, and is a result of an initiative taken by an alliance of 12 civil society organizations working on nutrition. These organizations include the Jamie Oliver Foundation. Jamie Oliver will be speaking at the event. Save the Children, the NCD Alliance, the World Obesity Federation, the International Diabetes Federation, but also World Vision, the One Campaign, and a variety of other organizations. Other reports that have been submitted are on the final report of the Commission on Ending Childhood Obesity, an event on financing for NCDs, an event on air pollution, an event on cancer control, and also on physical activity. We should know this week or next week which events have made it onto the final list. Next slide, please. Finally, just as we're getting ready for the WHA, we'll be sharing a detailed advocacy briefing with you around the 9th of May. The next NCD webinar, which is currently planned for the 11th of May, will include presentations on the final reports of the GCM's working group on financing and the engagement of private sector, which we are hoping will be a discussion item at the WHA, our advocacy priorities, and an overview of with more detailed information on side events. And really in the next few weeks, I encourage you to reach out to us to let us know if you're attending the World Health Assembly, and also share any relevant intelligence and as well as your own WHA advocacy priorities. On that note, thank you very much, and I'll hand over to Cristina, who will provide you with an update on the first WHO Global Meeting of National NCD Program Directors and Managers.
Thank you, Alena. Hello, good morning, good afternoon to everyone. Can I have the next slide, please? So I'm talking today about the first ever WHO Global Meeting of NCD Focal Points, National NCD Program Directors and Managers. This took place from a month ago exactly, from the 15th to the 17th of February in Geneva at WHO headquarters. The aim of this meeting was really framed around specifically getting to 2018, that is the UN high-level meeting on NCDs that is planned for 2018, really looking at national progress on the global commitments to date. And this specific meeting was convened by the Global Coordination Mechanism, and it specifically set out to support national efforts in the implementation of 4 time-bound commitments as set out in the 2014 UN outcome document on NCDs. And those were, by 2015, setting national NCD targets for 2025, developing national multisectoral policies and plans to achieve those targets, to, by 2016, reducing risk factors for NCDs as set out in the guidance in the WHO NCD Action Plan, as well as strengthening health systems to address NCDs, also as set out clearly in the WHO Action Plan. Next slide, please. The global meeting was attended by a number of NCD focal points, and it was exclusively for government representatives for these NCD programs, program directors and managers. NCD stakeholders such as academia, civil society, the private sector were engaged in an NCD stakeholder forum, which took the format of an interactive dinner on the evening of the 16th and a marketplace breakfast on the morning of the Wednesday the 17th, and these were put together by the Global Coordination Mechanism, the NCD Alliance, and the World Economic Forum. The structure of the interactive dinner basically offered the opportunity for diverse stakeholders to really present a series of very kind of practical examples of what is being done at a multisectoral level on NCDs, and so there was these rotating stations that were discussing issues such as governance, prevention, health systems, integration and coordination, access to meds, and financing for NCDs. We were fortunate enough to have the presence of some national and regional NCD alliances like the Healthy Caribbean Coalition, with the Tanzanian NCD Alliance. There were many members in attendance of the different federations involved with the NCD Alliance, the supporters consultation group, and a series of other stakeholders. And really, this offered the opportunity to interact with the NCD focal points. Next slide, please. So the meeting itself was attended by, what the NCD Alliance heard was that it was attended by exactly 222 country participants. Now this includes mission representatives country representatives to the WHO, and so this, and also each country was represented by more than one. Several countries were represented by more than one representative. In any case, this was very, very well attended, and it was interesting that the sessions organized over the over these 2 days basically had a very kind of strong regional focus. As you might imagine, obviously the NCD focal points on a regional basis would have a lot in common to discuss. And so I would encourage webinar listeners to check out this link here of the WHO with regards to this meeting, and to actually see the agendas for the workshops for specifically the regional working groups, because I think that gives us a really good flavor as to what are the issues of importance to the different regions. Now, the follow-up to that, to this meeting is still ongoing. The NCD Alliance is still in discussions with the WHO to understand if there will be, for instance, a report emerging from the meeting. As soon as there is one, if there is one, we will share with our network. But we understand that specifically there will be a setup of a virtual community of practice for both at global and regional level, specifically for NCD focal points, so to continue this very rich exchange of experiences at a peer-to-peer level. And also there has been a very strong and robust civil society follow-up. So the NCD Alliance has encouraged national and regional NCD alliances to be reaching out to NCD focal points that were in attendance to really understand what the national follow-up of this meeting is, and specifically what are the opportunities for civil society engagement. Multisectoral approaches to NCDs were a very strong focus of this meeting, so that's a great hook for civil society involvement. And finally, at the global level, it was fantastic to have a stakeholder forum on NCDs with civil society, private sector, academia represented, but we feel that the discussions that happened there were so rich that we would in the future really be encouraging the WHO to have that broader stakeholder and such essential approach to NCDs actually be a part of the proceedings of this meeting. And yes, I pass over to Katie, our moderator, for Q&A.
Thanks, Cristina, and thanks, Alena, as well for the EB and WHA overview. Alena, a question for you. You obviously mentioned the WHO reform and the framework for engagement with non-state actors. How likely do you think it is that it will be adopted at this WHA, obviously given that this has been a very, very long process?
Yeah, that's a good question, one that I guess we've asked ourselves in previous years as well. From my perspective, the discussions at the EB really highlighted kind of a rift between high-income countries and low and middle-income countries. And I think depending on who you talk to, you get very different questions. Certainly very heated discussions around this implications paper, with some countries fearing that having such a paper available before the final text of the framework will be agreed would further delay the discussions. And it's kind of hard to say. I was quite positive that we would see an adoption of the framework, but I think the resource implications for headquarters, but also the regions of the framework would certainly require very, very long and detailed conversations. So I think we still have quite a ways to go. I think you should probably ask me that question again on our next webinar after the meeting of the open-ended intergovernmental meeting in April, because that will give us an indication as to whether at least the text has been agreed and whether discussions around implications are going.
Great, thanks. Also, do we know of any relevant technical briefings that will be at the World Health Assembly, or is it too early to know that?
The only one that I know for sure about is the one that I believe there will be a briefing on the global strategy, but there is no official list, as far as I know, that has been published yet.
Okay, thanks. And just one final question. I guess the other kind of big topic at the World Health Assembly this year is the process around the next Director General. What do we know about that process so far?
Yeah, so that process will sort of really kick off later this year with the official nominations, and then there'll be a narrowing down of 3 candidates, I believe at the EB in 2017, and then these 3 candidates will be campaigning, or will enter the heated phase of campaigning towards the WHA in 2017 when the WHA elects the next Director General.
Great, thank you, Alena. Cristina, one question for you on the NCD Focal Points meeting. Obviously, this is the first time that they convened the Focal Points meeting. Are they planning to do it in the future, kind of repeat it in a couple of years, for example?
Absolutely, that is our understanding. It probably won't happen on a yearly basis, as you can imagine. It is quite costly to be convening these meetings, but we do understand that the WHO would be wishing to convene these every couple of years.
Great, thank you. In the interest of time, I think we now need to move on, but thank you, Alena and Cristina, for those excellent presentations. So now let me pass over to Priya, who will talk us through the New York side of NCD advocacy, particularly the Sustainable Development Goal Indicator Framework. Priya.
Thanks very much, Katie. So I will go very briefly through a few processes that are happening here in New York, starting off with the Global Indicator Framework. And as a brief overview, the Interagency Expert Group on SDGs submitted a proposed Global Indicator Framework of 230 indicators to measure progress on the 169 targets in the Sustainable Development Goals to the UN Statistical Commission for endorsement at their annual meeting. And the indicators to note from that, amongst others, are those for target 3.4 on the target on NCDs. As you can see there, we've got 2, one on the mortality of CVD, cancer, diabetes, or chronic respiratory disease, and also a second indicator, which we're very excited about, on suicide mortality rate. Of note, the revised proposed framework, which was discussed just last week, has a new second indicator for target 3.8.2 on UHC, and the revised indicator is what you see there, the number of people covered by health insurance or a public health system per 1,000 population. And that is a bit controversial, as it's much weaker than the previous iteration, which addressed the prevention of catastrophic out-of-pocket expenditure. So there's quite a strong push from WHO and also civil society for the previous indicator covering catastrophic expenditure to be reinstated, and there's been a letter sent to the UNSC and IAEG to revert to the previous indicator. So we expect further work will continue on that. And the IAEG will be meeting for the 3rd time in Mexico City at the end of this month. And there's a link there to their work plan. Also a link to the proposed framework up at the top of the page there. And that is not the finalized framework that was agreed by the UNSC. That one has yet to be updated. Next slide, please. So the UN Statistical Commission had their 47th session last week here in New York, where one of the main purposes of their meeting was to discuss the proposed indicator framework, which they did end up endorsing, definitely acknowledging and stressing that work will be ongoing as knowledge improves and new tools and data sources become available over the next 15 years. They also produced an outcome document, which the link is hyperlinked for you there. And I've also included a link to all documents for the UNSC at the bottom of the page. Next slide, please. So next steps for indicators, now that they have been endorsed by the UNSC, the framework will be finalized and posted online and then sent to ECOSOC and the GA for adoption. Meanwhile, the IAEG will continue its work. Their main work plan for the meeting at the end of this month will be to discuss the tier system for indicators. They have classified indicators as tier 1, 2, and 3 based on the methodology already existing. Tier 3 indicators are those for which an internationally agreed methodology has not yet been developed. So that will be something they discuss at the end of the month. They will also establish a procedure for methodological reviews and begin to develop global reporting mechanisms. And more information is available on the IAEG's website, which is linked in the previous slide. Next slide, please. So moving right along into the Commission on the Status of Women. That is happening currently in New York. It began yesterday and will continue through next Thursday, the 24th. The priority theme and the review themes are there, women's empowerment, and it's linked to sustainable development. So the CSW, these 2 weeks will consist of a ministerial segment with roundtables and high-level interactive dialogues, and also quite a few side events. So there's a draft outcome document that's available online, as well as the full organization of work and their timetable. Next slide, please. So something that's very exciting this year, that there are quite a lot of NCD-related side events, and those are the ones I've listed there, starting with one today on the Every Woman, Every Child's Global Strategy. That's at lunchtime, and will actually be webcast on the UN's official webcast site. We also have an event tomorrow in the evening, prevention and control of NCDs and chronic illness, and then 3 events hosted by WHO over the next week as well on air pollution, nutrition, and then mobilizing against NCDs for women. So the full calendar of side events can be found at that link. And then of course, please do email us with any other events that we might have missed. Next slide, please. Sorry to be breezing right through this, but quite conscious of time. So I will briefly go over current work on the issues of access to medicine. The UN Secretary General convened a high-level panel on access to medicines in mid-November, and it's comprised of 16 individuals from diverse stakeholder groups and supported by an expert advisory group, which is comprised of experts drawn from the public and private sector, academia, and CSOs. There are 3 complementary work pathways, all leading into their overall purpose, which is listed there. And these are the assessment of proposals on the issue and recommendation of solutions, technical support provided by the expert group, and a public consultation process. And I'll get a little bit into that on the next slide. Thank you. So I've got a link to the official process up at the top, but what has happened thus far is that there was an open contribution from the 21st of December to the 28th of February, during which over 100 contributions were received from various stakeholders, and they are all available online. The NCD Alliance, we submitted a response, which I'll cover in detail in just a moment. And also the panel held the first of 2 global dialogues in London on the 10th of March, where they heard from selected contributors based on the open contributions on topics such as patents, strengthening policy coherence, and partnerships. The second of these global dialogues will be held this Thursday in Johannesburg and will be live streamed, which you can watch using the link that we've provided there. As a result of these dialogues and the open contributions, the panel will draft an outcome document kind of stating the situation and the difficulties and some proposed solutions in access to medicines and technologies and IP, etc. And they will draw, as I said, from the contributions received and inputs during the dialogues. So this document will be drafted in mid-April and will be agreed in June at the UN High-Level Meeting on AIDS. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, we submitted a contribution to the panel to ensure the issue of access to essential medicines and technologies for NCDs is included in the conversation. The link to the full submission is on the previous slide, but some highlights are as follows. We really wanted to emphasize that there are numerous political commitments in existence to reduce the global burden of NCDs, and that includes addressing access to essential medicines and technologies for NCDs. So it's something that governments and all stakeholders must deliver on. We also emphasize the need to consider the issue from a holistic perspective, given the special needs of people at risk or living with NCDs along the life course. We also wanted to highlight that underdeveloped national health infrastructures and financing systems, and not patents, are some of the main issues for inadequate access, resulting in the need for reactive health systems. Also, optimization of supply chains requires procurement of quality goods with involvement from a multitude of stakeholders and multisectoral partnerships. So next slide, please. That is just a very quick and brief overview of some of the processes happening here in New York. I know that was very fast, so happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Priya, for that presentation. We currently don't have any questions in the chat facility, so let me pose you one. So you're obviously mentioning the indicators for the Sustainable Development Goals. Do we know of any moment over the next kind of 15 years up until 2030 that those indicators will actually be reviewed?
Thanks, Katie. So from what I understand, it will be an ongoing process. They haven't set any dates for set reviews yet, but I imagine as they run into issues perhaps with collecting data, we might see some revisions for certain indicators.
Great, thanks. And do we also know, I mean, obviously the NCD targets and indicators are monitored and measured by the World Health Organization. Is the data from WHO going to be feeding into the way that the Sustainable Development Goals 3.4 and NCD targets are monitored?
Yes, definitely, and that's actually something that the IAEG will be discussing at their meeting at the end of the month, discussing how national and global reporting on these indicators and targets will converge and be brought to the high-level political forum in July when they will discuss monitoring and review of the SDGs.
Great. Thanks very much, Priya, for that comprehensive overview of UN New York advocacy. And so that comes to the end of our formal presentations. Just to finish on the last slide, if we could move to the last slide. So this year there's many NCD-related conferences that we just wanted to highlight to you. Many of our federations are holding conferences this year, and at all of these we're going to have really, really strong focus on NCDs as well as the disease-specific focus that they all have. So just to highlight them to you all, we're firstly on the 21st to the 24th of April in Budapest is the Alzheimer's Disease International Conference. And at the ADI conference, we're going to be having an NCD dialogue session, so 2 different sessions on NCD-related issues there in Budapest. And so we've included the link for all the registrations for these conferences on this slide, so advance rates until the 12th of April. Then in June, on the 4th to the 7th of June, the World Heart Federation World Congress of Cardiology and Cardiovascular Health is being held in Mexico City. There again, we're going to be holding an NCD Cafe with NCD-specific sessions, and there's a huge number of NCD-relevant sessions in the official program as well at the WHF Congress. And so there you can see there's a lower fee until the 13th of May. Then later in the year, on the 26th and 29th of October, is the Union's World Conference on Lung Health. Again, we'll be holding NCD sessions there, so I really encourage you to attend as many of these as are relevant to you and are of interest. And then finally, at the end of the year, on the 31st of October to the 3rd of November, is UICC's World Cancer Congress with the title of Mobilizing Action, Inspiring Change. And again, we're going to have an NCD Cafe there as well as an NCD program, which will have a huge number of NCD sessions. So really encourage the NCD Alliance Network to be considering these conferences as an opportunity to be learning from one another and sharing good practice and really getting to the key topics on NCDs as well as these disease-specific areas. Okay, we'll finish the webinar there. Just to mention that our next webinar, we'll be holding it at the beginning of May. We're looking around the 11th of May, as Alena mentioned. And that webinar will be focused, obviously, very specifically on the World Health Assembly. We'll have a lot more information by then on the official agenda and the timetable and when specific sessions are going to be held, and all the side events will be final then as well. So I really encourage you to attend. Thank you very much, everyone. Goodbye.